the evening of August 30th, 1939, the German superliner SS Bremen, one of the fastest liners in the world, left New York Harbor for the last time. Her course was kept secret. Captain Adolf Ahrens sailed south for Havana, but as night fell and the superliner slipped out of view, the great ship's nameplates were painted over, and she went into a total blackout. Her course was abruptly shifted north. Mattresses and cans of fuel were brought to her promenade deck so she could be scuttled at a moment's notice. The HMS Berwick and HMS York were waiting in Halifax, ready to intercept the liner. Bremen's radio operator silently listened for any signs of them as they sailed dangerously close. If she was spotted, the cruisers would surely tail her for the rest of her covert voyage. Then, on September 1st, 1939, the Bremen's crew got the news they feared. The German army had marched on Poland. Soon the world would once again be at war, and they were far from safety. Their giant ship, the pride of Germany's merchant fleet, was a valuable target, and Great Britain was eager to prevent her from ever reaching home again. After the carnage of the First World War, Germany's merchant fleet was decimated. The three largest ships in the world, Albert Bonn's Imperator, Vaterland, and Bismarck, all survived the war, but were turned over to Great Britain and the United States as war reparations to make up for tonnage lost, including the Lusitania and the Britannic. Immediately following the war, none of the European powers were in the economic position to resume the feverish building that characterized the pre-war decade, and Great Britain's Mauretania comfortably maintained her speed record for several years. Germany was eager to overcome the economic devastation they suffered after the war, and in the fall of 1926, North German Lloyd ordered a pair of superliners that would re-establish a premier German transatlantic passenger service. The two almost identical ships were constructed simultaneously at the AG Weser Yard in Bremen and Blom and Voss in Hamburg. The ships were designed to prioritize speed over size with the ultimate goal of recapturing the Blue Riband for Germany. The twin ships, the Bremen and the Europa, incorporated a radical new streamlined design to achieve that goal. They had a low silhouette with raked bows and short, stubby funnels that resembled destroyers more than contemporary luxury liners. Their designers were obsessed with creating hulls that produced as little drag as possible. Their hull plate edges faced forward rather than aft, and they incorporated a streamlined rudder meant to produce better maneuverability at high speeds. Finally, the Bremen and the Europa were the first merchant ships to incorporate the Taylor bulbous bow, an innovation developed and used only by the United States Navy at the time, though it's standard today. The two ships' interiors were luxurious examples of the popular late 1920s German New Objectivity design movement. The style, similar to Bauhaus but less extreme, prioritized function and marked a sharp turn toward modernism. The Bremen was launched by President Paul von Hindenburg on August 16, 1928, only one day after her sister Europa. Though the Europa was originally intended to sail first, a fire occurred during her fitting out process that delayed her maiden voyage by several months. And so Bremen would take the lead. She was powered by four geared steam turbine engines that could generate 135,000 shaft horsepower and powered four propellers. She had a cruising speed of 27.5 knots, and it was said that during her sea trials she briefly reached an astonishing 32 knots. She was 51,656 gross registered tons, 938.6 feet long, and had a beam of 101.9 feet. She could carry 2,139 passengers and 966 crew. Her builders were obsessed with speed and modernity, and even fitted a seaplane launch between her funnels that could deliver mail to her destination a day earlier. Her maiden voyage took place on July 1929, and though it got off to a rough start due to fog, she was soon able to come up to speed and reach the Ambrose lightship in 4 days, 17 hours, and 42 minutes, a full 8 hours faster than the Mauretania's previous speed record. She sailed into New York to much fanfare and celebration. The Bremen in her career had a fond relationship with New York, and the ship proved popular with passengers. Europa would join her sister the following March, and the older and smaller SS Columbus rounded out Germany's transatlantic service. By 1932, the three ships captured more than 12% of the North Atlantic passenger service, but the rise of National Socialism in Germany soon put a strain on Bremen's American popularity.
And we are determined to continue our efforts to remove possible sources of difference and thus to contribute to assure the peace of Europe.
The Bremen's popularity with international travelers began to drop after Adolf Hitler rose to power in 1933. Her decline in popularity was hastened when the Nazi Party began introducing cadres of SS stormtroopers on all German passenger ships. As was the case with the German population back home, Nazi sentiments among the Bremen's crew ranged from quiet discomfort to intense party loyalty. After 1936, all German ships were purged of foreign crew and SS staff were deployed through various functions including stewards, waiters, and galley staff. The Bremen had 150 SS staff among her crew. Bremen's first captain, Leopold Ziegenbein, resisted the Nazi infestation of his ship and refused to end his correspondence with the required salutation, Heil Hitler. He eventually elected to take an early retirement in 1936, stating that he could not in good conscience represent, quote, that party abroad. Go Ziegenbein. He was replaced by Adolf Ahrens, who captained the Columbus. He was experienced with the Bremen, frequently subbing for Ziegenbein before his retirement. Adolf Ahrens was not a Nazi loyalist. His allegiance were primarily to his ship, his crew, and his country. But while many of the party's actions made him uncomfortable, he ultimately didn't resist and mostly followed orders. Though the United States had a large German-American population, tensions rose rapidly due to the Nazi Party's aggressive nationalist policies and rhetoric. It was the express policy of the North German Ley line that in order to attract international travelers, Nazism would be downplayed as much as possible. But the Bremen, like all other German liners, flew the Nazi flag and became a target for anti-Nazi protests. In July 1935, protesters rushed the ship and tore down the Nazi flag, throwing it into the Hudson. Since at the time Germany had two national flags, the swastika and the black, white, and red flag of the German Empire, US authorities decided that no national symbol of Germany had been harmed in the incident. Hell yeah, US authorities. Hitler was so enraged by the incident that he made the swastika the national flag of Germany on September 15, 1935. Further demonstrations took place on board after Germany's involvement in the Spanish Civil War in 1936, and the Nazi flag was torn down at least 2 more times by 1938. By 1939, tensions were reaching a breaking point and it was becoming clear that war was inevitable. On August 22, 1939, the Bremen departed Bremerhaven for her final passenger voyage. She carried 1,770 passengers on board, mostly consisting of US nationals looking to escape Europe before tensions reached their breaking point. A few days into the voyage, on August 26, the Kriegsmarine High Command ordered all German merchant ships to don camouflage paint and head immediately to German ports. Not a very subtle message. But Captain Ahrens defied the message, choosing instead to complete the voyage as scheduled and deliver his passengers to New York. A message was transmitted to Germany defying orders for radio silence and informed High Command that the Bremen would continue to New York and then head to Havana for safety. The message was a deliberate ploy to throw the US and Royal Navy off her trail. Bremen entered New York Harbor at 6 p.m. on Monday, August 28th and docked at her usual spot at Pier 86. Captain Ahrens and his crew intended to depart as soon as the ship could be refueled. But US authorities had direct orders from President Franklin Delano Roosevelt himself to keep the liner in New York as long as possible. By late August 1939, the United States was well aware that war was all but certain in Europe. From the outset, the US was officially neutral, and the American public was fiercely isolationist, with only 8% of the population in favor of joining the war even by July 1940. Nevertheless, the government was dedicated to quietly supporting their allies and coordinated closely with the Royal Navy. President Franklin Roosevelt, who served as Assistant Secretary of the Navy under Woodrow Wilson during World War I, was keenly aware of the very real threat Germany could pose in the Atlantic. He remembered Germany's conversion of the passenger liner SS Kaiser Wilhelm de Gross to an auxiliary cruiser in World War I. He was genuinely concerned that powerful merchant ships like the Bremen could be quickly armed and pose a major threat to US merchant shipping as they transported vital supplies to Great Britain. There were also spotty intelligence reports that suggested ships like Bremen had armaments hidden in unlikely spots like beneath the floor of her swimming pool. The concern was that once war was declared, the crew would quickly arm the Bremen at sea and wreak havoc on unprepared US shipping. Whether these suspicions were true, it was clearly to the Royal Navy's advantage to reduce German naval tonnage and, better yet, reserve a powerful ship like the Bremen in New York until she could be requisitioned for the Allied war effort. After all, Roosevelt was confident that the US would eventually be pulled into the war sooner or later. So when the Bremen docked at Pier 86, US authorities were ordered by Roosevelt himself to delay her departure as long as possible. This was tricky because the US was still bound by their official neutrality and had no official reason to keep the ship from leaving long term. So they got creative. New York Harbor was known for efficient turnarounds, but when Bremen requested refueling, the process was delayed. Authorities conducted extensive searches of the ship looking for any evidence of hidden armaments. They drug out the process by taking several long coffee and lunch breaks. Bremen was also required to demonstrate her compliance with U.S. safety regulations, even though the ship intended to leave New York Harbor without passengers. Every life jacket was inspected, and all 26 of her motorized lifeboats had to be fully lowered to demonstrate that they were all in proper working condition. The mood on board was tense. Captain Arens even considered the possibility that they would have to make an unauthorized break for it, but an unguided departure from the busy New York Harbor would have been incredibly dangerous. Even if the ship could manage to clear the port without the aid of tugs, the U.S. Coast Guard would almost certainly intercept them before they could clear the harbor. So Captain Arens and his crew humored authorities as they slowly ran out of reasons to hold the ship. He also ordered sunscreen and other provisions for his crew to prepare them for a trip to Havana. He had reams of black paper purchased from an art supply store that could be used to black out the windows. Finally, in the evening of August 30th, authorities had run out of reasons to delay the ship, and the Bremen was authorized for departure. At 6:30 p.m., she left New York Harbor for the last time. Her crew dipped her colors in salute and waved a fond goodbye to the crew of the Normandy. They probably didn't know then that the two ships would soon meet similar fates. The Normandy would never leave New York, and the Bremen would not survive the war. As Bremen sailed past the Statue of Liberty, her band played the Nazi Party anthem while her crew sang along, their arms extended in the Nazi salute. They sailed out of New York Harbor into a dense fog, her destination a complete mystery to the rest of the world.
We shall defend our island, whatever the cost may be. We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall fight in the hills. We shall never surrender.
After dropping off the New York Harbor pilot, Bremen continued steaming southeast into the foggy mist of the Atlantic. When she reached the outer limits of U.S. territorial waters, Captain Arens commanded all topside lighting extinguished, even navigational running lights. The ship plunged into blackness as the lights of the United States coast disappeared into the dark fog. Lookouts on the ship were increased to 26, and after a few moments, Captain Arens ordered a new course, 040 degrees. Havana was a decoy. Bremen took a sharp turn northeast, bound for home. As the covert voyage began, crews were ordered to bring all mattresses from tourist class to the promenade deck and place petrol every 20 meters. If the ship was intercepted by a British warship, Captain Arens was prepared to immediately scuttle the ship. Once a majority of the crew evacuated in the lifeboats, a designated group of firemen would set the ship ablaze, while another designated engineering party would open the seacocks and flood the ship. The captain, chief engineer, and first officer would be the last to leave. As they sailed off the coast of Nantucket, the weather grew worse. The poor visibility was actually an asset, making her harder to spot by nearby ships and grounding patrolling seaplanes. Crews quartered in the forward sections of the ship were moved aft, considering the danger of sailing at full speed with low visibility in full blackout. Soon, Bremen received word that Germany and the Soviet Union had signed a non-aggression pact on August 23rd. They then received a coded message from High Command instructing them to sail for the Russian port of Murmansk. Despite her speed of over 27 knots, the crew went to work painting the entire ship a ghostly gray to reduce her visibility. Crew used ropes to lift themselves up her bright yellow funnels, quickly painting them a sloppy gray. They lowered themselves in lifeboats to paint her sides. Her radio operators listened carefully for any signs of nearby ships. When other ships were detected, Captain Arens would abruptly alter course to avoid coming within visual range. As they passed by Halifax, they came dangerously close to the HMS Berwick, the HMS York, and the U.S. Coast Guard ship George W. Campbell. Bremen's radio operators took careful steps to track these ships as they silently passed. Then, on September 1st, 1939, Bremen got the news they were dreading. German troops had marched on Poland. Captain Arens, remembering the devastation of the last Great War, reacted with deep sadness, fearing another war would once again bring destruction to his country, but his primary concern was getting his crew and his ship to safety. War was declared by Britain and France on Nazi Germany on September 3, 1939. The crew of the Bremen had good reason to fear an encounter with a British warship. Only hours after war was declared, the German U-boat U-30, having just received word that a state of war existed with Britain, spotted the 14,000-ton British-flagged passenger ship Athenia. She was bound for Montreal and carried 1,410 passengers. U-30 fired 2 torpedoes at the Athenia in the first action of the war at sea. One struck her at her port beam, the second misfired. Passengers of the Athenia thought the second torpedo's explosion was the U-boat opening fire from her deck guns on the stricken liner as she began listing dangerously to port. She would take 14 hours to sink. 118 people lost their lives, including 16 children and 22 Americans. Though the crew of the U-boat thought they were firing on a commerce raider, the action was interpreted by the Allies as a sign that Germany had adopted a policy of unrestricted war at sea. The Bremen would now be an even greater prize for any captain of the Royal Navy. Bremen raced for the Denmark Strait. The crew was unprepared for the cold temperatures and took clothing that would normally be sold to passengers in the ship's store to keep themselves warm. On September 6th, as Bremen entered Russian waters, her crew's anxieties boiled over when they spotted a ship low on the waterline. She reversed direction and quickly outran the oncoming warship, but when they realized it was actually a Russian torpedo boat, they resumed course and rendezvoused with the Soviet warship. A group of Soviet officers boarded the Bremen, and after some awkward attempts to communicate in broken English, a Russian-speaking steward was brought to the bridge to translate. Bremen finally dropped anchor in Murmansk later that day, having traveled 4,045 nautical miles since leaving New York 6 days and 13 hours earlier. It was an unfamiliar port with an unlikely ally, but for now, the Bremen was safe. In Murmansk, the Bremen's crew had little to do but wait. The port city, though busy with German shipping, was mostly unfinished. On September 18th, 850 of Bremen's crew were sent home to Germany by rail, leaving a skeleton crew of 70 to maintain the ship. By the end of September, a German tanker arrived to replenish Bremen's fuel. The mood in the port city continued to deteriorate when war broke out between the Soviet Union and Finland on November 30th. Finnish air raids struck dangerously close, and Soviets ordered all ships in the harbor to darken their lights. Captain Ahrens waited patiently for an opportunity to escape the Soviet port. Before dawn on the morning of December 7th, the Bremen's skeleton crew pulled the liner out of Murmansk under the cover of a heavy snowstorm. On December 12th, she was intercepted by the British submarine Salmon off the Norwegian coast. In a tense exchange, the submarine surfaced and issued repeated warnings to the Bremen to surrender. But before any action could be taken, the Salmon was forced to crash dive when a German Dornier flying boat appeared on the horizon, sent by the Kriegsmarine to escort the Bremen. Finally, on December 13th, the Bremen made it to her home port in Bremerhaven, receiving a hero's welcome. Captain Adolf Ahrens was promoted to Commodore and widely celebrated by the German press. The covert voyage was an unlikely success. After numerous near misses, lucky breaks, and truly impressive evasive actions from her entire crew, the Bremen was safe in Germany, but the efforts of so many ultimately proved fruitless. Over the next several months, the Bremen was refitted as troopship number 802 in preparation for Operation Sea Lion, the German invasion of Great Britain that ultimately never came to fruition. Then, on March 16, 1941, a fire broke out in her wood-paneled dining room, which was being used to store mattresses. Brilliant idea, guys. Fire spread rapidly through the ship despite her crew's best efforts to bring the blaze under control. The ship began listing dangerously, and to prevent her from capsizing, she was flooded and came to rest in the shallow water of the Weser River. The charred hull was a total loss. It was initially speculated that the fire was set by British saboteurs, but upon further investigation, it was found that the fire was set by a 15-year-old deckhand named Walter Schmidt. The boy confessed that he set the fire after being beaten by his supervisor. He was brutally executed soon after. Portions of the hull were scrapped for war munitions over the next couple of years, and the hull was towed upriver to be further dismantled between 1952 and 1956, though portions of her hull are apparently still visible to this day. The whole ordeal was a pathetic and shameful end for one of the greatest ocean liners ever built. The Bremen and the Europa were revolutionary and widely beloved ships. Overnight, they reignited the race to dominate the Atlantic passenger trade and rekindled the building frenzy that had been stalled since World War I. They were immensely popular and offered a glimmer of hope for a Germany eager to rebuild before the Nazi Party dimmed their success. Bremen, to me, perfectly represents Germany in the interwar era. She was built by the Weimar Republic, by a country with something to prove and endless potential for a peaceful and prosperous future. A country that would be overrun by extremists and ultimately burn itself to the ground. Ocean liners carry the spirit of their nation. Bremen set out with something to prove, and she was truly revolutionary, but her potential was cut short by the fire that her country unleashed upon the world, a fire that ultimately consumed the great liner.